So Linus Tech Tips released a video this week that was the part 1 of their Linux Daily Driver Challenge, and I decided to do a reaction video for it because why not? I've actually never done a reaction video at all for anything, so this will be interesting, and because I'm a little bit crazy, I decided to do it live streamed on my channel, so we'll see what happens here. Let's jump into it.
To celebrate the exciting launch of Windows 11, Luke and I are challenging each other to ditch Windows altogether and replace our Windows PCs with Linux for a month. But I'm not talking about our work machines that are basically just used for word processing and web browsing. I'm talking about our personal rigs, the ones we both use on a daily basis, primarily for gaming.
I was gonna skip it, but nah.
Embarrassing.
What was that? I'd just like to interject for a moment where you're referring to... Of course they did. Of course they did.
Embarrassingly, I have never actually made an earnest attempt to daily drive Linux, and one of the reasons for that is the utterly paralyzing number of choices.
Oh, okay, hold on, I gotta move my camera. Start playing again, see what he's saying.
You have to make before you even get started.
So a paralyzing number of choices. I think that's an interesting thing because there are a lot of choices. Now, there's really not a ton, as many, like when you look at the list, there's hundreds in that list, but you really shouldn't be looking at all of those. There's more of like 10 or so, maybe like a handful in general that you would really be looking at, especially as a beginner. I mean, I know, even someone who is a Windows power user is still a Linux beginner, so they wouldn't be looking at the vast majority of the options there. So it's not as bad, even though there's still a lot of options. And in looking at the stuff on screen showing different icons, it's interesting that they have these icons. I mean, there's the typical you would see, like the Linux Mint, the Elementary, Ubuntu, Manjaro, Pop! OS, Fedora. Those are all like things I would have expected to see. However, it's also kind of weird that I see Laka on there. For those who don't know, the one that's like, so it's Garuda Linux, Chimera OS, Laka, and then Draugr OS. It's weird because those last three are gaming specific distros. However, Laka is more of a retro gaming distro made for, doing a appliance gaming. So if you wanted to make like a retro console out of a Raspberry Pi and that sort of stuff. That's what that one's for. So it's interesting to see it's in there. So they mentioned that they were going to be looking at the gaming stuff, so that makes sense that would be there. But that is a distro that you would not use for everyday purposes. And Chimera is also not everyday purposes because that's like a big picture mode SteamOS type of thing. So let's get back to the video.
To make before you even get started. Now, I could just call on industry contacts or even use internal resources to make these decisions for me. But the point of this challenge is that Luke and I should be using the exact same resources that anyone else would have.
I like that policy. It's very good policy because then you'd have a little bit of a skewed experience if you had access to people who can just show you how to fix everything instantly and you're not going through the process yourself. So I do like that as the policy going forward.
And with that in mind, right out of the gate, I would forgive the average gamer for making it as far as Google hit #1 for best Linux.
Well, that's not the best way to find the best distro to use, just searching Google, but also I don't expect much from this article.
Distro for gaming and bailing on the entire deal. I mean, nothing against the author of this article. I did pick up some really useful information, but it is full of jargon that a non-Linux enthusiast couldn't possibly be expected to know.
Okay, sure, there's a lot of stuff in here that this is not helpful for beginners at all, like gaming-focused kernel modifications. They don't even look like they specify what that even means. Tons of DE options, desktop environments, but I mean, that even in itself is kind of esoteric. All right.
Not to mention seemingly conflicting information. How is it that Ubuntu can be simultaneously easy to use and beginner friendly and a hassle to set up?
Fair enough. That is kind of weird. Easy to use and a hassle to set up doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's because they're talking about like installing proprietary drivers, which, because in terms of like, if you want to play games without having any kind of like frames per second issues and whatnot, you wouldn't by default have those drivers installed typically. So in terms of Ubuntu, you'd have to install the drivers after the fact. So maybe that's what they're referring to. But it is weird. It is kind of worded weird. That's fair.
Another big one is that customization gets billed as this major selling point for Linux. And
True.
Fair enough if that's your thing, but speaking on behalf of normies, I don't want a dozen novel ways to do the same thing. I want one fast, easy one. I mean, it's horrible when Microsoft scatters system settings all over the place. I think we all agree on that. And so we should all agree that it's horrible when anybody else does it. I mean,
Yes, I agree that system settings should all be in one place, and that's, for the most part, that's kind of true depending on what DE you're using, what distro you're using. There are sometimes they're scattered, but there's, it's not necessarily customization in terms of like being able to do the same thing with, like every single type of configuration. It's more of like, if you wanted to customize how it works, you can do so. So that's really what they're referring to, customization, not necessarily everything is scattered, but it's a fair point because there are things that are, if you're going to edit something in GNOME, you have GNOME settings and also GNOME tweak tool, and then you have stuff in Plasma, you have like the system settings, which has most of the stuff, but not everything is in there.
Let's move on to hit number 2 here, this time from TechRadar. Supports several controllers.
Is it just me, or is the website look of how this website is laid out is exactly as the other one? So these are two different websites, but they lay their article out exactly the same. I haven't looked at the article, so I don't know, but it looks like it's the same thing.
Should not be a selling point for a gaming-focused product. It seems to imply that most of my stuff won't work. And included games are not the reason that anyone chooses an operating system. How are these articles so out of touch?
I love the pinball reference. It's fantastic.
Furthermore, the messaging around what makes an individual distro stand out compared to the other ones gets really muddy in some places. Like the way that these articles are often laid out, it sounds like if I choose the one with support for hybrid graphics, I'm going to be giving up kernel-level gaming optimizations. Or that if I want broad hardware support, that could cost me the customization that I crave.
Yeah, these articles are not good options. I would tell people to never look at these articles because they are basically just, it feels like they're more like keyword stuffing, because these are typically articles made by websites that have people who are not remotely, Linux people, just finding different pieces and slamming it all together and hoping that it works out. So, and that's actually a very good point about the whole like comparison between things. If you're going to have a pros and a cons list, you should use the same criteria for every single one of them to kind of give a reference of like a, kind of like a pricing table that you would see on websites for services and whatnot.
But the truth is that that's not the case. With a bit of elbow grease, the gaming-centric features and tweaks of one distro could be applied to another, but with some exceptions. The Pantheon user interface, for example, is specific to elementary OS, and
yes, though not exclusive. You can put it on Fedora, and it's also, I'm pretty sure, on Arch, but you can get it on Fedora as well.
For a more gaming-related example, TechRadar mentions a feature of GamerOS, now called Chimera OS, called the Chimera app that sounds super cool. It allows you to easily install and manage non-Steam games and even ROMs for a wide range of retro consoles. Except that if I wanted an OS that doesn't support multitasking, I would invent myself a time machine so that I could go back and use it.
Okay, but to be fair to Chimera OS, it is not intended to be an OS for everyone. So this is kind of the issue of having so many options, because he looked specifically for gamer-based distros or distro for gaming, you're going to find distros like that are specifically for the purpose of an appliance mode, because Chimera OS is more like sitting on the couch having Steam Big Picture mode as an option to play it. So kind of creating your own console, so to speak. So that is the reason for Chimera OS. And people not knowing that, like Linus, it makes sense that it would seem like that's a negative, even though that's one of the cool things about Linux is that there are ways to do appliance approaches to Linux.
But wait, hold on. The Chimera app can be used outside of Chimera OS. There's even a guide. But unless I want to really get into the weeds, I better stick with something based on Arch, by the way, like Manjaro or Garuda. Not that that's going to be my final answer. In spite of its spectacularly stupid name, pop!_OS topped just about every listicle that I found and legitimately has some compelling selling points, like demystifying the notoriously difficult process of getting my NVIDIA GPU working properly.
That is very nice. You just download the ISO for NVIDIA users and you don't have to worry about the drivers. That is a very nice feature of Pop! OS.
And making installing the apps and tools that I'm going to need to run my Windows games a one-click affair with the Pop Shop.
Not necessarily the Pop Shop will handle everything. The Steam stuff easily for sure, but the Pop OS, I'm not sure if it does like Lutris and that kind of thing, like how much it handles that. But by the way, also the Pop Shop, fun name. Not relevant at all to this video, but I just wanted to put that in there.
If it was 10 years ago and I was looking for a challenge, Manjaro's bleeding edge approach, please forgive the occasional screw up, definitely calls to me. And did I mention it's based on Arch, by the way? But I want to win this thing without pulling my hair out for a month. And Pop! OS looks like a really good bet for that. It's Ubuntu based, so if I really want to get under the hood, that's totally an option. But the challenge here is play games, not get your PhD in Linux smartassery.
I, on the other hand, after a lot of deliberation, decided to go with the daring, the uncompromising Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop environment. As for how I think that's gonna go, honestly, I'm pretty confident. I've used Mint before. I daily drove Ubuntu, the distro it's based on, for about 2 years back in school. So I'm not scared of figuring out how to install a GPU driver.
That's interesting because Linux Mint is a very commonly suggested distribution, and I do think it has a lot of value for the beginner. It's one of the 10. I'm not sure if it's necessarily the best, depending on the situation. Like if you have very, very new hardware, distributions that don't have updated hardware stacks are not going to be the best, and I think Mint's in that category. So depending on what you have, it's an interesting choice that Linus went with Pop and Luke went with Linux Mint. I am aware, based on some tweets that some people sent me, that the Pop! OS thing changed and he went with Manjaro. I'm not sure exactly why, but I did get some hints that there was some kind of bug or something. So the problem with being for those who don't know, and if you're just watching this video as the introduction to me, I do a news show on Linux called This Week in Linux. So I am paying attention to what's happening in the Linux world, and I see news. So I do see a lot of things happening. So I have, like, some of it is a little spoiled, but not everything. So let's get back to it.
Or use a package manager. I'm comfortable getting my hands dirty with Grub, but that doesn't mean I'm not a little scared of you. I'm pretty technical and I work in development every day, but hardcore Linux chads are absolutely terrifying. You scare me, and I really want this to go well because I still want you to like me when this is all over.
I like that as a goal, but I do think it's interesting because the community, like, I think that people say the community is toxic way more than it actually is. It's a very small minority of people. There are people who are like that, but that's true for every single community of any type of subject whatsoever. That's going to happen. I think that the problem more is that they are very, very vocal in this community, but they're not as big as it seems like it is. So I don't think that's necessarily something to be afraid of. Or maybe I'm just, my community in terms of like DLN community and everybody else. If you want to have a friendly community, check that one out because I guarantee you that one is because I help make it. Back to the video.
Got my drive ready, and Windows couldn't possibly have picked a more appropriate time to just bug the crap out. It's like it knows what's gonna happen. It won't let me click power.
That's a fun one. And Windows, everybody. Windows.
Obviously, I'm not 100% committed to this yet, so my plan is to remove my existing SSD from the system.
That's a good idea, and it's also a very good tip that I would tell people if they can remove this, like if they have multiple drives, they should just, like, for example, some people will buy a new laptop. You could sometimes take the drive out of the laptop, put a new drive in, and that way, if you want to resell the laptop, you could also just put Windows back on in an OEM style, and it's kind of like, you know, new again. Not exactly, because I wouldn't say tell people that it's new again, but that is an option that I've seen people do, which I think is a good idea. Because if you have other drives, there's no reason not to try that, not do it that way.
It's not a Gen 4 drive or anything, but I'm not expecting that to matter. I mean, what am I going to be doing? Running direct storage? Ha! Got him.
So what Linus just said about the Gen 4 thing, as a person on a show called Hardware Addicts, I should know what that means. I don't, so I'm going to have them explain it to me on a future episode of Hardware Addicts. So check that out on Destination Linux Network. It's just perfect timing for plugs, just constantly.
So this is what happened last time. My desktop, you can see where it's supposed to sort of end, but it keeps going, and a mouse can go over there. So I'm going to right-click right below the Mint logo. Nothing shows up, but...
So I have seen stuff like this before where you have multiple monitors and there's some like you right click and things just on the wrong monitor and that sort of stuff, or like the configuration is just weird. For example, if you have like a horizontal monitor and a vertical monitor, that can be weird stuff can happen, that kind of thing. However, this is something that I have a guess, like a prediction of what's going to happen, because it's being pointed out as an issue in the video. So my guess is that the right side monitor that he's currently showing is having the display pop up, but the interaction will be on the other monitor. And I don't know why that happens, but I've seen it before, and it's not a very common thing to happen, but it can happen depending on your setup for multi-monitor and that sort of stuff. Like I typically run 3 monitors, so I've had stuff like that happen occasionally. It's usually pretty rare, but it has happened before. So that's my guess to see what happens.
Here's the menu. If I try to mouse over these, I can't select them. But if I move my mouse back to below this M, there it is. I found it.
Yeah, nailed it.
Okay, so my mouse has to be right there. I'm just going to see if I can do an easy fix of just turning off my monitor here. To be fair, it is not installed yet. This is a live boot environment.
Just turning it back on would not fix it, but also when you install it, it would fix it. Because typically that's just because the drivers are not available. And if it doesn't fix it, if you install the distro and then upgrade the system, it would fix it because it's just missing a driver usually. If that happens, it's not a very common thing to happen though. So it's unfortunate that they experienced it because it's now going to be looking at the views, 1.7 million views, that's not ideal, but it happens. Things happen.
I used Thunderbolt to connect to a dock for my main display was going to cause problems with the installer because there's no drivers installed or anything. So I hooked up my monitor that's here in the server closet, but hey, there it is.
That's pretty cool. I was when they was talking about doing this challenge, I heard him people talking about how he uses a Thunderbolt dock to do everything, and I kind of expected that not to work. So that's pretty cool. It does because I don't have one of those, so I've never tested it. And I don't know anybody who has tested it, so that's cool. That worked.
Just like that. Here we go. Full name. Yes.
Just do it.
This is not important at all, but the whole full name thing that every distribution puts in that list, every time I install, I don't put a full name. I just put a name for a user or my first name, and that's it. Why does it always say full name? That's kind of weird. Not relevant to anything at all related to this video, but it's just a side tangent, I guess.
I do want the multimedia codecs. It's nice that Mint comes with those.
So every distro comes with that now? Basically, not every distro. I shouldn't say every distro, but pretty much every distro does come with it. Pretty much every distro, because it's usually just a checkbox to install them. There used to be a thing from like 10 years ago where Linux Mint's claim to fame was that it came with the codecs by default, and other distributors didn't offer that. But now it's just a checkbox in the installer in most installers. And in the case of Mint, they adopted the same style that Ubuntu did from the Ubuntu installer. So it's kind of funny how, that's still a thing that people reference, even though they've been doing it the same way for, I think, 4 or 5 years now.
Check video drivers. I knew I was going to run into that installing Mint instead of Pop! OS, but that is a challenge I have decided to undertake.
I mean, that'll happen if you have NVIDIA. That's just going to happen in general because most distributions don't come with the NVIDIA drivers already pre-installed, and the only one I can think of off the top of my head is Pop! OS. So there's other ones that make it easier to do it, but that is the only one I know of that comes with it. But like, it's funny because watching this video and they talk about using NVIDIA, there are likely going to be some issues with NVIDIA here and there throughout the video. And it's kind of like I've been spoiled because I switched to AMD a couple years ago, and it has been amazing to use AMD for my CPU and my GPU because I don't do anything. I just install any and every distro, and I have full support of my hardware. That's awesome, and I've gotten, I guess, a little bit spoiled by it. So
I knew audio was going to be a challenge because I don't.
Oh, Go XLR. Okay, so Go XLR is a cool piece of hardware. It's just a cool idea, and I want one. But last I checked, they have like almost zero support for Linux, so it's probably going to have something.
I don't think the Go XLR has any kind of. Oh, this is interesting. Output. Hello? Okay, it appears to be taking my input right now, which is my mic right over here, presumably, and turning it into output. I was looking for a simple way to just list all the hardware connected to the system so that I could verify if my drivers are installed. Linux apparently doesn't really work like that, but I can just install this utility called hardinfo.
So Linux does have that, but it's not there in the sense of like depending on which distro you have, it does come with it. So if you have a KDE Plasma based distribution, it will come with something like that because it's called K Info Center, and it will give you those details. But depending, I guess Pop! OS doesn't come with something like that, but there are some versions that do.
Not exactly a hardware info substitute, but it's a lot better than nothing. Of course, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on any of this for now, because the goal today for part 1 is to pick a distro, get it installed, and run a game. I will definitely need Steam. Failed to install Steam. Morning, you were trying to remove?
Oh no. This is why he went to Manjaro, for sure. I have to assume that he totally did this because he wouldn't know not to do this, but just by default. But pop desktop, pop session, okay, yeah, that'll break the system. So if that's his first experience with Pop! OS, it makes sense why he would switch.
The following essential packages. What are you talking about? I've done nothing with this other.
Wait a second. Did that say Xorg? Oh, Xorg due to Pop desktop. Yep. Okay. So it's going to break his system, not just mess up the desktop. It's going to just basically like just shut down essentially. Not actually, but kind of.
With this, other than install that hardinfo thing. It's hilarious. The last time I tried to do anything on Ubuntu, I ran into this exact same thing. I was told, it's super simple. You just install it.
It is basically super simple, and you just install it in certain cases. And in Pop! OS is one of those distros. This is absolutely a bug. There's no way that this is intended to happen at all. I don't know what it is. Because Steam is a 32-bit based platform, there's probably some kind of 32-bit package that created some weird issue. I don't know why this would happen, but it is 100% a bug. There is no way that would. And I had also, because this has happened, I would bet that this has already been patched and it's good to go.
No, you do not. This is stupid. Apparently, this is the solution. And I have to type yes.
So this is actually a pet peeve of mine that I've never liked. Really quick, there is a little bit of blame for Linus not reading this part because it does say the following essential package will be removed, and it says this should not be done unless you know exactly what you're doing. That's not clear enough to what's about to happen, in my opinion, for these details. And the thing that you're forced to type is not clear enough either. So there you can give him a lot of leeway and say that he didn't know what this was going to do and he didn't read through it, because the 99% of what is in this list is kind of like gibberish stuff to most people. So you can forgive the idea of like didn't see the 2-sentence mixed in between with the nightmare nonsense of like how much there is. I get it from that perspective. So I'd say like maybe 5-10% fault on his part, but the vast majority of it needs to be addressed to the point where this one should not even be possible unless you do an extra, jump through a bigger hoop. And the idea that yes, do as I say is the only thing you have to say. It should say something like, yes, I'm aware I'm about to break my system. I know how to fix it. I'll do it anyway. Something like that, where it's very long and very clear, then that's fine.
Do as I say in order to install it. And maybe it will install and launch now. What is the point of having a... Oh.
It's going to do that. Yeah.
Hello? Did my computer just hard reset?
The reaction is funny. So it did not hard reset. It removed Xorg and Xorg stop, and therefore that happened. So a cool thing about Linux is that you can recover from this kind of situation. It seems like a massive problem, and it is. You're essentially breaking the system by removing Xorg, for example. But you can easily replace it or fix it just by reinstalling the things that were removed. But understandably, Linus would not know those things and would not be comfortable in doing those things. So I get why he would decide to move to a different distro, because from his perspective, it's like, I'm just trying to install Steam and all of a sudden my system is broken. Like, I get why that would. But it is also worth noting that the Pop Shop would not allow him to do it, and it was going through the terminal that made it possible. And another cool thing about Linux is that you can do pretty much whatever you want, even if you shouldn't. And this is an example of that kind of power. So there's a pro and a con to that, as you can tell. But there are some other things like if you use a Fedora distribution, for example, or if you use Fedora, whatever edition, you could have DNF history, and you could do DNF history undo last, and it will just fix everything from one command, which is kind of cool. As a Fedora user, I've gotten to love the package manager of DNF from stuff like that. I don't really use that, and I've never had to use it for anything that actually mattered. I just like to play with the stuff. So it's just really cool.
However that's pronounced, open source driver, fantastic. Happy they made that. But we are going to try to move to the proprietary NVIDIA 470 driver.
Yeah, as expected, because if you want to play games, you kind of need that. The Nouveau drivers are very impressive, the amount of work that they're able to do. And because it's all reverse engineered, it's not like NVIDIA's helping them make it. So it is very impressive that they have got it to be as good as it is, and also relatively good for gaming for older hardware and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I get it. If you have anything relatively new, you'd want the proprietary.
Now, Linux Mint also has an update manager. A new version of Update Manager is available. Apply the update. It updates.
Most distributions of Linux have an update manager. It's worth knowing that that's true for most distributions.
And then it finds all the different updates that we need.
Oh, I guess in the context of Windows versus Linux, that might be a different experience, because there is technically a Windows update manager, but it's not the same thing.
Logged in, and this is what I got. Ubuntu comes with absolutely no warranty. I can see why.
Well, to be fair, this is because it is a free thing, and saying that it comes with warranty, that would be not a very good idea for legal purposes. So that's why it says that.
To be clear, it's entirely possible that I did something completely wrong, not knowing what I was doing, and I'm responsible for the OS getting bricked. I just also think that with you guys along for the ride, the things that I did were not entirely ridiculous or unreasonable. So you can be mad at me for breaking it, but just at least acknowledge that it could have happened to anyone who's not already fully well-versed in the black arts of Linux 3.
Yes, it could easily happen. The problem is that the notification was not clear that it could break your system, and that's really what it was. But it could totally happen to anyone. It's not necessarily his fault. It's the warning not being clear enough. It should be like completely overt. You will break your system, and like something like that. So, because otherwise, that would have stopped. If he had to type that, he probably would have not continued, because all it says is that do as I say, and that's not enough. So, hopefully, I did hear about something related to this, because System 76 and Debian are talking about changing this. Now I know why they're working on changing this. So, there you go.
Well, who needs sound anyway? Microsoft has a very broken settings situation right now, but this is worse.
So the sound issue is still likely the Go XLR thing. I don't know if he mentioned about having sound or not last time, but the Go XLR is probably involved in the sound issue, just because there's no drivers for it, and there's no. I want there to be, so people who make Go XLR, please make it support Linux, because that would be awesome. But I would expect that's the issue.
What is X server? X server gonna give it to you what? Okay, all right. This seems to do kind of what we need it to do.
There are a few things in that settings utility that are helpful to have activated, and it will improve stuff. Like you might have screen tearing issues. You can change things for that. I haven't used that in so long that it just kind of like threw back memories or whatever, because with AMD, it's just, I'm done already. Like I install it, I'm done. So it's kind of like bringing back memories, not the good kind, but.
The video ended up a lot longer than I expected. The goal was simple: install Linux and run a game. And I managed to screw it up so royally that I'm here hours later, still trying to figure it out.
The unfortunate thing about that is wait 3-4 days, and that wouldn't have had that experience, because the Pop! OS would have been fine. It's just that bug, that bug.
This is a native Linux game. Let's just play it.
And we're gaming. The best part of this whole thing is that we are just getting started. A lot of the games that I want to run, like Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, appear to have ways to run them. Discord looks like there's a way to get it going. It involves a lot of command line. Hopefully I won't brick my OS. But
Discord is really easy to install. You can just use the Flatpak or the Snap, and that's it. You're done. So Discord is not hard to install at all. And I think there's actually RPMs and debs too. I'm pretty sure. I just use the Flatpak, but I think there are other ways. It's not a difficult thing to do. There are things that, like if you want to run a specific game, there might be some extra configurations that you'll have to do for those specific games that are not made for Linux. But you shouldn't, people shouldn't expect a game that's not made for Linux to work on Linux and then be disappointed if it doesn't. In fact, you should be amazed and mind-boggled that a game that was not created for a platform still works on that platform. That should how people react to those things. Like, it should be amazing, not games. And he's not really done that or anything. I'm just saying, as an example, when people say, well, this game doesn't work, so Linux is not good enough, like, the fact that it plays games it's not supposed to is in and of itself amazing. So,
step 2 is getting streaming working. Both Luke and I stream. We both need it working if we're going to run this for a month. So
that part's super easy, because OBS works just great on Linux, as I'm doing right now.
Good luck, everybody.
So I got a message in the live chat that says I should react to the pinned message that's on the LTT video. So let's do that. The issue I had with Pop! OS has been fixed for some time now. After the fix, a broken package should never be able to uninstall the desktop unless you specifically work around it. I agree. That is true. That shouldn't be possible. However, to be clear, you did work around it through the command line. So it should be harder to work around and more obvious that you're working around it, because the yes, do as I say is not clear enough, like I said. But you did kind of work around it, and the broken package, the Pop Shop wasn't allow you to do it. So, again, I don't blame Linus for it. I think that it's maybe 5% his fault for not reading those 2 lines mixed in with the hundreds of lines of other stuff. But it is patched, and also, as I said, I saw some messages for them like rephrasing how it's done in Debian, which if that happens, that'd be great. So that'd be a benefit for people going forward. So there is benefit to this being in the video, even if it did kind of get an unfortunate experience for Linus in the process. So typically that won't happen. And if you install Pop! OS now, that won't happen. Well, that's it for the reaction. So hopefully I provided some information of that was useful in some way. I don't remember exactly what I said because I was just doing it off the cuff. But yeah, I guess that's the point of a reaction video, isn't it? So yeah. If you'd like more content like this, let me know. If you want me to react to the future videos that Linus does, I may or may not do those live. It depends on the timing of when they're released and that sort of stuff. This was more of like, I wanted to do this video when I saw it was published. I wanted to do the reaction to it, but I didn't have time throughout the week to do it. And then after the show, I was like, you know what? Let's do a live stream. Just go ahead and do the reaction right after. If you want more of this kind of content, let me know in the comments below.